Socialism is no more the answer to capitalism than hedonism is the answer to starvation. We must look to history for the answer. Socialism has been tried many, many times. It has never succeeded, and has always been little more than a stick to prop up the desires of small, weak men. David looked at Carter from across the stage as if he believed he had won. Carter smiled right back at him, preparing to end that thought. I couldn't agree more. The auditorium went quiet at this revelation. There weren't as many people as there would be next week, but the debate team members made up about 15 in all. The 13 not on stage, 14 if you counted Mr. Markle, sat in the seats of the auditorium and watched these two titans of debate ply their craft. The sudden reverse of Carter's platform, capitalism versus socialism, had them stumped, and even his opponent seemed flabbergasted by the sudden turn. Carter, are you conceding your platform? Mr. Markle asked. Far from it, Carter said. I'm simply saying that just because a perfect form of socialism has never existed, doesn't mean that it should be abandoned. By that logic, since a perfect form of capitalism has never existed, we should shunt it aside as well. We do not throw away concepts in this country, simply because they don't bear fruit. Religion, politics, even concepts such as banking or public works are far from perfect. Yet we continue to change them, evolve them, and such is the nature of this country. Just because all of socialism has never worked before, and Carter put air quotes around the word worked, does not mean that some form might not in the future. Capitalism has failed us in many ways, but we continue to cling to that old concept. Why throw the baby out with the bathwater, just because the soap doesn't appear to be cleaning properly? David didn't seem to have an answer for that one, and as the other members of the debate team clapped, Carter smiled and shrugged at him. It had been a filibuster, a dirty trick, and he knew it. But, just like David knew, in debate you either won or you lost. Interesting to say the least, Mr. Markle said, though technically what you have presented is a non-answer. It is perfectly reasonable, but some of the older judges may find it a poor substitute for fact. Carter smiled. Mr. Markle, I don't believe I'll find anyone at regionals as skilled a debater as David here. He was rewarded by laughter from the rest of the debate club, but Carter saw that David was not among them. He was being mocked, and he knew it. Carter did not intend to mock, but still he was. In reality, Carter had a lot of respect for David Brown, and his passionate, if not aggressive, debate style. David had a lot of skill at debate. His problem was that he was also a hothead who could be put off by unorthodox answers or questionable gambits. Carter's answer had technically been a cheat, but David's lack of rebuttal would have been enough to net him a victory. Well, Mr. Markle said, I'd say you two are both definitely in the semifinals as our best debaters. We'll see which one of you will progress to the finals after next week's debate with West Central. Until then, study your prompts and prepare for anything. Judges at the semifinal level have been known to use material not present ahead of time, so I advise you to cast your net wide on a multitude of topics. There was some light rumbling as they all grabbed backpacks and book bags and made their way towards the exit to the auditorium. Carter collected up his notes, but when the shadow of David Brown fell over him, he'd been expecting it. He smiled up at him placidly. David was a sore loser, always had been, and ever since he decided that Carter was his rival in the 10th grade, he had taken every loss very personally. That was a dirty trick, and you know it. Mr. Markle might let crap like that fly in his debate club, but the judges at regionals will. David, unlike you, I've been to regionals before. I was chosen last year to go to regionals, while you sat on the bench and watched. I've been pulling crap like that since I started debating in the 7th grade. I'm fully aware of what I can and cannot get away with in this competition, so why not hit the books a little more, instead of lobbing insults at your betters? David turned red as a tomato, but instead of swinging one of those impotently balled fists at Carter, he turned and stormed out of the auditorium. Carter slid his notes into his pocket. He had won his second debate that day, it seemed. "The usual, Carter?" Carter smiled at the pretty barista as she reached for a new cup. He'd been coming to Jelly Beans for most of his high school life, and Michelle was part of the reason. She was a little older than him, maybe 19 or 20, but she seemed to remember all her customers, and often acted as a coffee-scented therapist for her regulars. "Of course," he said, giving her his winning smile. "I'm celebrating a little, so why not make it a large today?" She laughed as she put the small cup away and got out a bigger one. "Oh, what's the occasion?" "Unrequited dreams, I'm afraid," he said, staring at the counter. "That bad, huh?" she said, adding espresso. "My mom called me after debate club and told me there was a letter from Dartmouth waiting for me on the counter." "Hey, that's good news." "It would be, but no matter what the news, I'll have to refuse them." "And why is that?" Carter turned to look at the speaker, who had rudely barged into his conversation with Michelle, and instantly regretted it. The man was somewhere between 40 and 60, and appeared artlessly handsome in that way that middle-aged men sometimes do. He wore a suit, the cut making Carter think it was tailored and not off the rack, and he could have been a businessman or some kind of stockbroker. But when he smiled at Carter, he felt a cold chill run through him. The smile was too big, taking in most of his mouth, and made Carter think of sharks hunting fish. "Well, not that it's any of your business, but I don't really have the money for college." Michelle set the drink down in front of him, and when their eyes met, he could see that she was pretty put off by this guy. She seemed to be trying to warn him, but also didn't want to insult a customer. Whatever instinct had sent fingers of cold up Carter's spine had apparently affected her as well, and now she was simply hoping this hyena would leave her den without tearing her to shreds. "And why is that?" the man asked, taking a sip of coffee as he put his full attention on the boy. "My parents aren't wealthy. In fact, they work multiple jobs just to keep me in private school. I know it's nearly beggaring them to keep me there, not to mention to pay the mortgage and to feed my other 3 siblings." Carter immediately felt foolish as he admitted all this to the stranger, but it seemed like he'd lost control of his talented tongue. Despite all the warning bells going off about this guy, he brought something out in Carter that he didn't feel often. Did mice tell snakes their deepest secrets before they devoured them? Would this man wring out all his shameful secrets before he swallowed him whole? Aren't there scholarships? No means by which you can get yourself there? I don't play sports. My grades are above average, but nothing that would net me more than a basic scholarship. Debate is really all I have, and unless I can go to state, I don't really have much of a chance to pursue it in college." "What if there was another way?" said the man with the hard-to-look-at face. Carter raised an eyebrow. "Look, sir, I don't know what you're about, but if you're suggesting something improper, far from it, lad. I represent a group of individuals who are interested in talent. They pay good money for said talent, especially in those who may not have the means to utilize it to its full potential." "I see," Carter said, suddenly deciding it might be best to take his coffee elsewhere. "Well, I wish you luck in your pursuits, but I'm not disposed to whatever it is that you may be suggesting. Good day." As he left, he expected the man to attempt to stop him. He expected the man to get angry, or to try to put his mind at ease, when really, what he wanted to do was trap him. He had heard of people like this before, those who came to those in need and tricked them into deals they weren't quite prepared for. This man was likely some sort of purveyor of predatory loans, and Carter had no desire to be in debt to anyone for the rest of his life. He was an intelligent young man, gifted with a silver tongue, and he meant to keep his talent out of the hands of those who might misuse it. Instead, the man only shrugged. "Suit yourself, young man, but I'll be here if you change your mind." Carter did not believe he would be changing his mind on the matter, but youth is often trapped by its folly. Carter was sitting on the commons the next day, when David Brown approached him with his group of hangers-on. David, as he had said many times, did not have friends. What he had was a group of admirers and lackeys, people who would have evaporated like smoke if his father had not been rich and David not been popular. Carter had few friends, but at least he knew they were not the simpering followers that David had. "Preparing for your next dirty trick?" David asked heartily, earning him some chuckles from his minions. "Just imagining your dumbfounded face when your father's money doesn't earn you a spot in the debate finals, David." David began to turn red, the anger always so close to the surface with this one. "I'm getting that spot this year, and there isn't a thing you can do about it. Your dirty tricks and foolish pride won't help you this year. I've got an ace in the hole, and I know I'll get the spot." Carter ignored him, leaning his head back as he basked in the midday sun. "We'll see," was all he offered, and when the boys walked away, he felt a pang of frustration worm its way inside of him. What did it matter? What did it matter if he or David went to the debate finals? There would be another David at Dartmouth. There would be many Davids in his life, and all of them would get exactly what they wanted, because they had what Carter did not. David could get into any school off his father's name and the amount in his bank account. Carter had to work twice as hard just because his parents didn't have that luxury. What good would it do to debate when in reality all debates were solved with checkbooks instead of words? He took out the letter and read over it again. "Dear Mr. Mason, congratulations on your acceptance to Dartmouth College. We will have freshman orientation on the second week of August, and enrollment will begin at the end of your current semester. Financial aid is available for those without means, but you may want to look into other sources of payment if these are not amenable. Thank you for your interest in Dartmouth College, and we look forward to seeing you this fall." Alternate sources of payment. That was a nice name for a noose that would hang around his neck. It was his dream school, and he had wanted to go there since he was in the 7th grade. The opportunities he could find at a place like Dartmouth would allow him to rise above the problems that his parents faced. The friends he could make there, the connections he could achieve, and the things he could learn would allow him to make a name for himself. Carter had often thought he could use his gifts to enter politics, maybe even some kind of job with the embassy, but without connections and proper schooling, he couldn't hope to achieve any of those things. Politics was likely already closed to someone without means, but there were ways that he could work himself into such a position. It would take hard work and a lot of determination, but he could succeed on his own merits. Merits that would mean nothing if he didn't have the name of a prestigious school behind him. He closed his eyes as he lay across the picnic table, already contemplating the words the strange man had spoken to him the day before. "I'll be here if you change your mind." Carter tried to push the thoughts away, but he suspected that his mind might be wobbling on the subject. "Mr. Mason? Mr. Mason, your rebuttal." Carter shook himself, having been lost in his melancholy again. His teammates were looking at him, waiting for his flawless delivery, but his mind just wasn't in it. The auditorium wasn't full by any means, but the studious individuals who had come to see the semifinals were looking at him expectantly. He realized he was blowing this, about to blow his chances at the finals, and forced his mind to settle on his counterpoint. The correlation between wealth and success is inseparable. The idea that someone of the working class can obtain financial stability through hard work is a pipe dream. The days when someone can simply work hard to succeed are beyond us. And without outside means of wealth, the working class must be comfortable under the heel of those with wealth and power. He couldn't help but look at David as he finished, and grinned when he rolled his eyes. David should be very familiar with the premise, though maybe not from the appropriate viewpoint they were supposed to be defending. Carter had stayed up late studying for this debate, and the sleep he had gotten was far from adequate. He kept going back to the coffee shop again and again, and the smiling man was always there in his dreams. In reality, he hadn't seen him in close to a week, but the man seemed to burn in his thoughts nonetheless. He haunted his dreams, his words haunting his waking hours, and Carter was becoming frustrated with his dangled offer, though no more frustrated than he was with himself for considering it. Yes, but what about the American dream? What about the hopes that someone can come here with nothing and gain success? The number of immigrants who come here and start successful businesses has never been higher. People with barely more than the clothes on their backs can be financially stable within a generation. People willing to put in the hard work often do succeed, and I believe that such disparities can be bridged through hard work and perseverance. Look at the fluctuating numbers of YouTube content creators, people who have taken an idea and made a living at it. Look at the number of banks ready to extend loans to small businesses. This is the land of opportunity, not a place where the rich eat the poor, his opponent rebutted. It was Carter's turn to roll his eyes. West Central must surely be hurting for debaters if they let this girl get to the semifinals. Mr. Mason, your rebuttal? Why bother? Carter asked, and he could hear Mr. Merkel suck his teeth from the front row. My opponent clearly can't hear me from her mountain of idealism. Indeed, immigrants are no longer stoned when they come off the boat, but the argument was for the disparagement between the wealthy and the middle class, not the means to gain upward mobility. To say that a man who owns a restaurant or starts a YouTube channel is as comfortable as a man whose father's father bought oil stock is ridiculous. The opportunities held by the rich are as numerous as they are unknowable. You can look no further than the antics of our latest president, or Jeffrey Epstein. We live in a society where the rich do indeed eat the poor. They simply take small bites so we don't feel it as much. They whittle away at our time and our labors, and we are left with the scraps. To believe anything else is fantasy. The crowd clapped, but Mr. Merkel was shaking his head. Carter had pulled it out of the fire, but he was starting to lose some of his touch. We're driving up this weekend. Dad's got some golf buddies in New Hampshire, and he wants to visit the country club while he's up there. Carter had been changing out of his gym clothes when he heard David talking loudly with a few of his friends. It had been a few days since the debate semifinals, and Carter hadn't been sleeping any better. They were getting their towels ready to shower, something he had done as quickly as he could, and talking about weekend plans as Carter slid back into his regular clothes. Carter's weekend plans mostly revolved around studying for the debate finals, but he felt pretty secure in his position as lead debater. His ears had pricked up when David said New Hampshire, though, and he leaned in a bit as he eavesdropped. I didn't realize your dad was an alum, Roger said, he and Derek always moving around David like flies on crap. Yeah, he doesn't like to brag about being from a prestigious school. He prefers to let his skills in the courtroom do the talking for him. Still, it'll really help my chances of breaking into politics with a name like Dartmouth behind me. Carter felt his blood run cold. Dartmouth? His Dartmouth? David would be going to the school that he'd wanted to go to for so long, while he was stuck at some college. Worse yet, with his parents' income, he'd be lucky to afford a state college or a community college. David was talking about taking in the sights while they were there, but Carter could barely hear him over the blood pounding in his ears. This wasn't fair. How the hell had David gotten into Dartmouth? His grades were usually barely above a B, and he struggled with anything that wasn't math or extracurricular activities. How would he manage to swing an invitation to a school like Dartmouth? With money. That's how. His dad was an alumni, something that would make David a legacy, and he had likely spread his money around and schmoozed the right people in order to get his idiot son into a school like Dartmouth. They all turned when Carter slammed his locker shut, but he didn't even notice. He had trig next, but he decided to skip it. He strolled right out the front doors and was heading to the coffee shop with strides full of confident rage. If that was the price, then he knew where to get the currency. He knew people too, after all. The man looked up as he entered, smiling like a shark seeing a school of fish. He was leaning in the same spot he had been, waiting for Carter, and the look on Michelle's face told him all he needed to know. Had he been coming back just to see if Carter would change his mind? Why did he care so much? Was Carter's schooling really that important to him? The man made a grisly guardian angel, but Carter supposed that beggars couldn't be choosers. "Why, Mr. Mason, what a delight it is to see you," the man said, holding out a coffee as though he'd expected the boy at 2 o'clock on a school day. Carter accepted the coffee and discovered it was as usual. Had Michelle told this guy, or had he remembered from only a single meeting? "What's so heavy on your mind that you would skip school and come to speak with me?" Carter nodded. Straight to business, then. "You said there was another way," Carter said, careful how he asked. "For me to go to school, I mean." "I did," the man said, taking a sip of his coffee. What did you mean?" "I run a business that trades in a very particular commodity. It's quite lucrative, especially among the wealthy. I deal in talent, Mr. Mason, and business has been so good that I'm considering branching out. We've had a few hiccups, of course, but I think we're ready to push on into other forms of talent acquisition. Your talent for debate is remarkable, and we would like to pay you for it." "I'm not sure I understand. You want to pay me for my talent?" "In the form of a scholarship. For your talent, we will give you a full ride to the school of your dreams. Think about it. A way to attend the school you've always wanted to without having to place yourself in financial hardships. In 30 years, your own children could be attending as legacies when you use your connections to move mountains." Carter was thinking about it. It all seemed a little too good to be true. They wanted his talent, but what did that mean? They wanted him to speak on their behalf? They wanted him to use his debate skill for their company? Carter had heard of dodgy contracts, even seen a few, but this one seemed to benefit him more than was comfortable. How long would they need to use his talent? Was there a certain expectation? "All your questions and concerns are very normal, but I can assure you there are no hidden barbs. I've been paying people for their talent for a very long time, and I want to add yours to my growing collection. If you agree, then let's shake on it. Seal the deal, as it were." And with that, he extended a hand. Carter looked at the hand, but he didn't dare shake it. There was a trap hidden there, just below the surface, and it was one that had rows of teeth. Carter took a step away, backtracking as he kept the man with the extended hand in sight. The man's smile never wavered. "That's okay, sport. Think on it for a while. A deal like this comes around so infrequently, but don't wait too long, or it might just pass you by." The bell jingled behind him as he ran, but it wasn't the last Carter would see of that smiling devil. "Mr. Mason, your rebuttal?" Carter looked at Mr. Markle owlishly, blinking as he tried to focus. This was the most important debate of his life, and he needed to be on his game. If he fumbled the ball here, he could kiss any hope of a scholarship goodbye. If he didn't go to state this year and do flashingly well, Dartmouth would be out of the cards forever. He needed to focus, but he was so tired. Carter hadn't slept well for the past 6 days. It had all caught up with him the day he ran from the coffee shop, and it buzzed in his head like bees in a hurricane. The acceptance letter, the debate, David, Dartmouth, the smiling man's offer, the whole of his life, and the needle that it balanced on. It was all slowly driving him mad, and it kept him from snatching more than a few hours of sleep at a time. He had tried everything from sleep aids to exercise, but every time he closed his eyes, it all just coursed through him like a whirlwind. At the center of that storm was the smiling stranger, and his face took up a lot of space within his anxious mind. As he stood there trying to come up with a response for medieval economics versus Depression-era economics, all he could hear was the wind whistling inside his skull. David grinned triumphantly, and with good reason. He had gotten the upper hand in the last 3 debates, and Carter knew it. Depression-era economics were sounder than medieval economics because they had more to do with a banking system that was less corrupt than banks in debt to the crown and church. Allowed to flower in a freer market, they had less constraints placed on them and were more fruitful than a market under the heel of a monarch. Ah, yes, because a freer market really helped them when it came to the crash. The medieval market was also unpredictable, but I feel that the presence of a monarch often strengthened the economy through war and expansion, something a free market does not often benefit from. Check your facts, Davy. War is good for an economy built on industry, something the medieval market was not always known for. Everything from farmers to tailors benefit when a nation goes to war, while only the monarchs truly benefit from a war and a monarchy. I'll give you that, but the turbulent nature of the medieval environment gave the peasants more chances to thrive, whereas the so-called free market took advantage of the working class in ways that kept them poor and easily exploited. Carter had the argument, but it was like trying to grab something with a slippery hand. He would take hold of it, only for it to slide through his fingers as he tried to catch it. It would slip again and leave him stuttering. He had managed to take hold of something when the little bell rang on Mr. Merkel's desk, and he called time. "Boys, would you mind staying over?" he asked, as the others grabbed their bags and departed. Carter stood in a moody cloud as David shone resplendently. "Carter, you're a skilled debater, but you've been slipping lately. Your arguments are sound, but we need someone whose mind isn't going to slip at the wrong time. I'm recommending David to be our representative this year, but I would like the two of you to help craft his arguments. Perhaps, without the fear of limits hanging overhead, you can accomplish something grand together." It all sounded like so much needless blah blah, and Carter nodded as he packed his things away. He was angry and embarrassed, and when he strode silently from the hall, he could feel David watching him go in all his smugness. He had won, he had bested his enemy, and now he had achieved what he always wanted. He had a clear playing field, and Carter would be resigned to mediocrity for all time. Well, maybe not, Carter thought. As his feet took him inexorably towards the coffee shop, he could already see the man as he sat by the window. He watched Carter approach, smiling in unknowing glee, and when Carter came through the door and approached him, he tried to look surprised to see him. The illusion wasn't there, however, and he just looked like a cat who spied a fat rat for his supper. "Deal," Carter said, extending his hand before he could think better of it. "Deal?" the man said, cocking his head as though he wasn't sure what he was agreeing to. "I wish to make your deal. I will accept your scholarship for my talent." The hand shook only a little, and when the man extended his own and wrapped it in his cold embrace, Carter shuddered only a single time. There was a feeling in his throat then, and Carter felt his breath stick. Something was happening to him. Something was happening to his throat, and as it coursed over his tongue, he tasted putrescence in his mouth. It was as if he had regurgitated a rotten fish, and when he tried to gag, his mouth wouldn't obey. He was choking, his throat working, but nothing came out. Black spots appeared at the edges of his vision, and as he fell back and out of the stranger's grip, he heard Michelle call his name a single time. He woke up in the hospital. He woke up in a paper gown with an IV in his arm, and his mother dozing beside him. He tried to ask her what had happened, but as he opened his mouth, nothing came out. He reached for his throat, but it felt fine. He opened his mouth and turned to the nearby mirror, but everything appeared to be intact. His mother came awake as he checked his mouth and told him how happy she was that he was okay. "You fainted at the jelly beans. No one knew what had happened, and that young girl behind the counter was very..." But that was when she realized that he couldn't talk. 3 doctors and a score of professionals later, and no one seemed to be able to explain what had happened. All they knew was that Carter was now a mute for whatever reason, and it was likely to be for the rest of his life. An X-ray showed that his vocal cords had been damaged by something, and his tongue had been injured. No one could explain it. No one even ventured to guess. But Carter never spoke again. He was mute for the rest of his days, and he didn't remember the man until he got home and found the envelope on the counter with his name on it. The one from Libris Talent, extending him a full scholarship to the school of his choice. In exchange for your talent, take this chance to better yourself and to soar as high as you can in your current state. Yours, Mr. Sereph. It wasn't until then that Carter realized what he had meant. Carter's talent had been his debate skill, his eloquence, his way with words, and Mr. Sereph had taken it from him. He had taken his gift and left him with a Magi's gift, and now Carter would have to figure out how to use it. The next few months would be hard, but Carter would overcome them. He would spend the summer in physical therapy, and despite his mother's urgings, he would start school in the fall. He would go to Dartmouth. He would study whatever he damn well pleased, and that son of a bitch would foot the bill if he knew what was good for him. It was 2 years into his study of ancient history that he saw David again. It was 2 years before he discovered the other half of the puzzle. Carter was heading for his class when he happened past an open door and heard someone he had never expected to hear again. The dilemma of the pen being mightier than the sword is that while swords cut a man to death, a pen may cut a man's reputation to shreds as readily as it might cut his throat in the night. A pen may ruin a man in so many ways and never mark him physically. The sword may have the common decency to kill a man, but the pen will mortally wound a man for years to come. He stopped at the door and looked in to find David and another student engaged in a debate. He hadn't seen David since freshman orientation, and that had been a kindness. David had truly been his last great rival, and it shamed him for David to see him like this. He also couldn't stand the way David looked at him whenever they met. It was a knowing look, a knowing smile, and it reminded Carter of the man who had taken his talent from him. Now, as he listened to David shred his opponent with his argument, he realized what it had been for. The longer he listened, the more he heard his own words beneath the swaggering voice of David Brown. David looked up as the crowd clapped and noticed Carter for the first time. He smiled, and Carter realized who had bought the talent that had made it possible for him to go to Dartmouth. After all, had he not already known that money made the universe move? Had he not known that with wealth, anything was possible? It could get you into the halls of learning, catapult you into the most prestigious offices in the land, and even, it seems, silence your opponents and give you the words you couldn't find yourself. Carter hoped that David had paid a pretty penny for his silver tongue, because it had cost him so much in the long run. You're still here. I thought you might be. Thanks for joining me for tonight's story. If your insatiable appetite for horror knows no bounds, might I suggest one of our playlists, or one of our previous stories in the archive? There should be one appearing at the end of the story any minute now. And of course, if you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. If you prefer your horror a little more analog, you can always pick up one of my books. There's a link below to my latest, and it'll take you to all the great things that I've posted on Amazon. For my book lovers in the audience, I always suggest coming on down to Patreon so you can become part of my ghostly reader tier and get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. Speaking of my patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Unicorn Hollow for being our Spooky Ghost contributor. Thanks to Janet and Lady Vengeance for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, and Jennifer Damron for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you think you might like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, come on down to Patreon. I have many tiers. I'm sure you'll find one that suits you best. I always recommend the Ghostly Reader tier, since you get a signed book anytime I write one on your doorstep. But I have many tiers, and again, I'm sure you'll find one to suit you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.